Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mike Kincaid, and I lead NASA's efforts to engage students in our mission. And I'm really excited to be here and to introduce you to the astronauts we're going to see today.
And I'm Andy Aldrin. I'm president of the Aldrin Family Foundation, and today we're going to talk about the connections between space and education. And spoiler alert, it's all about you out there, the teachers and the parents.
So today we're going to hear from three astronauts: Tracy Caldwell Dyson, Bonnie Dunbar, and Nancy Curry Gregg.
We all grow up with our first memory of space, the first time space really inspired us. Now, for me, it was a little bit different because, well, I kind of grew up with space all the time. I came home every night with my dad. In fact, I could literally jump over my back fence into Alan Bean's backyard. So it was kind of there everywhere all the time. But Bonnie, I know you grew up in a very different environment. I think you're out in the eastern part of Washington State. What was the first time that space really inspired you?
I can actually remember that. I had been reading since a very early age because we didn't have TV, reading about space. And then we walked out in that October day when Sputnik night, when Sputnik was launched, and I could see all the stars in the Milky Way and this small orb circling the Earth. And I felt, I hate to use the word out of body, but there's depth to looking at the universe. And I had no logical reason for thinking this, but I said, that's where I want to be. This is where I'm going to point my life. And that has been with me since I was 8 years old.
I think if you were to ask my mom when my aha moment was, it was in her womb, because sitting there watching the first landing on the moon, she was a month away from delivering me, and she'd say that I was thinking about it then. But, like Bonnie had said, you walk outside, and I lived in the deserts of Southern California, and going out there every night to see the stars, it was an explosion of Milky Way every time. And so there's the start of me looking into the heavens and wondering what it was like to be there. It wasn't until I got into high school and about to apply for college when I started to think about what I wanted to do the rest of my life. And I wouldn't say it was very straightforward, but it was inspired by the teachers around me that led me to think about becoming an astronaut.
Well, actually, I was only 10 years old during the first moon landing, and I remember rushing home from a swim meet with all my friends and my parents and sitting around a very small black and white television set. And the thing that struck me, and I think that was life-changing, was the sense of pride in our nation, of this great engineering and scientific accomplishment. And it wasn't just the two very brave individuals who stepped foot on the moon, but it was that national accomplishment. And from that point on, I knew I wanted to be a part of that.
So Mike, we've talked a little bit about, initial inspiration of space and about the past in space. Why don't you tell us what's going on with NASA today to inspire kids?
So, I love hearing these stories about how people were inspired and how space really changed their life. And in these cases, they changed their career trajectories. And I think as we look at current students today, it's important just to pause for a second and hear about what is NASA doing today when it comes to space and to space exploration.
50 years ago, we went to the moon. We called it Apollo.
What many people don't know is that Apollo had a twin.
She was a woman named Artemis,
goddess of the moon.
We are returning to the moon
as a new generation of explorers.
This time to stay.
And to prepare to achieve humanity's next giant leap of sending the first human missions to Mars.
We believe our course will redefine what is possible.
That we would discover life-saving,
earth-changing science.
And that the challenges ahead will inspire generations.
This is our manifest.
For all who wondered if we could return.
For all who dreamed of pressing beyond.
This is your calling.
We go for all of America.
We go. We go as the Artemis generation.
We go.
So Tracy, we just watched that video where we get a chance to see what is America doing when it comes to sending humans back to the moon, in this case, the first woman to the moon. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit from your vantage point as one of our current astronauts. What do you think about Artemis and your role within it?
I think I speak on behalf of everyone currently in the Corps that this is an exciting time that we are in, and the chance to go back to the moon and honor and further the work that our Apollo astronauts and our team did back then is an amazing opportunity to be a part of the program today. And we're excited about all the preparation that is going into place, as well as the enthusiasm all around the country for the goal we have of getting back to the moon.
Bonnie, what are your thoughts as we look at going back to the moon?
Well, I'm very excited about it. My interest in the moon actually started in books. We didn't have a TV growing up. I guess you could call me kind of the old astronaut on this panel. But I was reading Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, and so the Apollo program was just kind of the culmination of all of that I'd been reading about. And then I had a teacher who read to us from a book, it was a fiction book actually, about exploration of Mars. So when we did finally get a TV and I was watching Flash Gordon and watching us go to space, my dream was to eventually explore the universe. So I'm so thrilled that we're going back to the moon and then I hope on to Mars.
Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks for those comments. Nancy, what are your thoughts as it looks like if we send humans back to the surface of the moon?
Yeah, sure, Mike. It's a great question. I absolutely know what impact the Apollo program had on me. I mean, the Apollo program, quite frankly, inspired me for the career that I have had. And so I think I see that same thing in Artemis, that inspiration of a new generation and a new generation of explorers and scientists and engineers that instill that national pride that we're going back to the moon. We're going to put the first woman on the surface of the moon. We're going to go beyond. We're going to use that as a stepping stone. And it's been a long time since we've had that. And so I think that igniting in this new generation that they can be a part of this really exciting program of human spaceflight is critically important.
All right, well, now I've had a chance to talk about what NASA is going. And I think as you look at this country and you look at the challenges we face as America, we're looking at how do we encourage kids to be part of STEM and STEM in studies and STEM engagement. And I think it'd be good just to pause and think about how we're currently structured. And I want to start this first question with Bonnie. You know, Bonnie, after you were an accomplished astronaut, you went off and you were the president and CEO of the Museum of Flight in Seattle, Washington. So you had a firsthand chance to see how students are impacted. And then, of course, now you're at Texas A&M University where you continue to teach students. Can you talk a little bit about the role of how you've seen space and innovative learning that we've been able to talk to students about?
Well, I think it goes back to that word called inspire. You know, students don't know what STEM means. We made that up at NASA and the National Science Foundation as an acronym. But just like Tracy and Nancy were inspired and I was inspired, you've got to catch the imagination of kids. And what we learned at the Museum of Flight and what my sister learned as a K-12 teacher is you got to expose kids to exciting things. And space is one of them. And they can go off into many different directions. But once they're hooked, you don't need to worry about motivating them. They'll be self-motivated to learn, whether it's mathematics or science. So it really goes back to that inspiration. We have to expose them.
I really think the two most important facets of preparing children to eventually be space explorers are two things. One is problem solving, and the other is teamwork. Problem solving, I say, because despite what-ifing every possible scenario we could ever find ourselves getting into on a space mission, we always encounter the unexpected. And to have that ingenuity, to have that creative problem-solving capability is really imperative. Not just when you're on the surface of the Mars or on the moon, but in an engineering or scientific environment as well. And then teamwork. I always tell my students at all levels that the world's problems are so complex they will never be solved by one person. They will be solved by large multidisciplinary teams. So understanding how to work in those environments, understanding how to value somebody else's perspective is critically important.
Tracy, you've had a chance to be on Sports Space Station and talk to kids in all kinds of different ways. Do you have any thoughts about how we inspire and how we reach kids in this current environment?
You know, I have to say, one word comes to mind, and that's curiosity. We have to not only tap into their curiosity, but help them recognize it, that asking questions is being curious. It's not showing that you don't know something. It's showing that you're thinking and that you got questions, that you're curious. And so I think, especially coming from a science background, it was curiosity that led me into science. It wasn't because I thought I was smart enough to do it. So I think in a word, it's curiosity. We have to tap into that.
So Mike, what is NASA doing? What are your priorities in trying to engage students, and I think more importantly, engaging teachers?
Yeah. Hey, Andy, thanks for the question. So 3 points. We're really trying to engage students in the work that NASA's doing, and whether that's helping us contribute to real-life problems that NASA has, or whether it's developing a future diverse STEM workforce, or providing these authentic learning experiences. Those really drive home the work that we do at NASA. And I would say, for people listening today, I'd say there's 3 ways that I would love for you to be able to participate and join us in that effort. First, I would love for you to go visit stem.nasa.gov. It's a website that we've created in the last 2 years that tries to bring together all the different resources NASA has with education in a way that educators can find it, and students and parents for that matter. And so you can go in there and find out where it's what interests you and how we can help you with that. The second thing is, I hope that you sign up for NASA Express. It's a weekly email, comes out every Thursday. NASA Express comes in your inbox with all the different things that NASA is doing over the next couple of weeks. And the third thing, I just have to say, I hope that you'll follow us on social media, and that for the people who are watching this far into the show, you are space cadets. I mean that with all sincerity. You are on board with the work that we do. But you probably have colleagues and other parents or other educators who may not have this level of detail. So if you find us on social media or NASA Express and you share that with others, I think it's a great opportunity for us to use this mission to inspire kids of all ages. Thanks, Andy.
It's my pleasure. So, the real connection between space and students are the teachers, the educators. I think it's interesting. Let's talk a little bit about what we can do to support the educators and what educators, frankly, have done for all of us.
I found, regardless of whether you're in 6th grade, in high school, or a graduate student, the more you can have practical application and hands-on material for the students, it solidifies the entire learning experience. I'm a huge proponent of active learning. In every single lecture session I do, undergraduate, graduate students, when I go into elementary schools, I try to give them hands-on activities, and again, intentionally put them in teams, put them into a scenario where they have to solve a problem. I always tell them that no one in your life, other than maybe a teacher in a classroom, will walk in and say, A equals this, B equals this, tell me what C is, I'll be back in a few minutes. It's all about framing real-world problems and coming up with those solutions to those problems.
I was at the Museum of Flight, and NASA does this, is you have to involve the teachers in the programs as well. And we live in a time when there are fewer and fewer math and science teachers available. Some states are recruiting them preferentially just to be able to teach those classes. So involving them in our programs, whether it be at NASA or at the museum, is incredibly important. and then involving the parents. We live in a tremendously complex age of computers and GPS and handheld devices. And we have maybe left some of our generations behind in that. So we need to bring the parents along as well and help them understand how important science and math is to the education of their children. And I think NASA does a wonderful job of that and reaching out to the informal education community. And Tracy can talk about this, but one of the missions of the astronauts has been, since I arrived in 1980 as an astronaut, was outreach to schools and how important that is.
Absolutely. I think that along with the teachers and the parents, that the community, I mean, it takes a community to raise kids, and it doesn't just happen in villages, it happens in cities and across the world. And with the internet and social media and the platforms that we have to reach around the world, our kids can tap into work that's being done halfway around the globe. I think that, like you said earlier, Bonnie, that the hands-on is some of the most important parts of learning. And for myself, I can speak to the fact I was better in a laboratory than I was sitting in a classroom listening to a lecture. My father, and talk about parents getting involved, I think parents just loving their kids and supporting them and telling them they can do it is a step in the right direction. But I even worked with my father, and some of the things my father taught me, I actually employed on the space station more than I did some of the science that I did, believe it or not. And so I think parents have a lot to offer their kids, and just being an example setter, if not a demonstrator of skills that build confidence. And I just see the education of a student, be it STEM or other fields, really is a community effort. And that community now is so much more global than it's ever been.
Yeah, and I think teachers need to be reminded of that. I think sometimes they get a little frustrated, and especially now. You know, I'm homeschooling my third grade granddaughter, and, you know, she's one of the few that ties into they're doing Zoom with third graders. And so there's just a few that are tying in, and one may be because some of them may not have the technology at home or the bandwidth at home, or parents that understand the technologies. And so I think I know how excited my own granddaughter gets when she talks to her teacher every morning, and it really means the whole world to them. So I think they need to hear that message now. I really do, especially now.
And let's say parents can directly or indirectly influence their kids in science, technology, and curiosity. I'm the first generation college student out of my family. My parents were homesteaders. But I consider my father and mother some of the most creative inventors because we didn't have a Home Depot down the road. We fixed everything and invented everything. I learned to weld when I was a kid, and I think that attitude they gave me, that there was nothing that was impossible, that you should at least try it, is something I brought through my life as well.
You know, I just have to say, Andy, I think you need to speak here because all of us have different parents who've encouraged us, and you have a very unique one.
You know, yeah, Dad taught in subtle ways. I didn't realize that, you know, when I got for, I don't know, my 6th or 7th birthday, one of those hanging trapeze sort of things that demonstrates Newton's fourth law, I had no idea that's what I was learning. I had no idea what I was learning. You know, I remember once we were driving with helium balloons, and he wanted to make sure that everybody paid attention to what happens to a helium balloon when you stop the car. All right, the balloon goes to the back of the car, not the front. And so, yeah, there were always lessons that were kind of there in everything. And, you know, as we both grew up, because he was still pretty much a kid, we just literally talked about space all of the time, everywhere. So, yeah, it was a constant education.
So, you know, your question was, I think, a good segue. Can you talk a little bit about how the Aldrin Family Foundation is working today in space programming and helping kids?
Yeah, Mike, I'd be happy to. So, you know, we've been talking a lot in this conversation today about words like teamwork, like inspiration, curiosity, all the things that come from space. And I've been loving it because that's really kind of the core of what we're doing. We're bringing the inspiration of space into the classroom in ways that really excite students. And so, one of the things that we do is we've got these 25-foot Mars maps and moon maps, and we put kids on these maps, and we let them create their own sort of version of what it would be like to live on Mars. And it offers teachers a great opportunity to create a number of just wonderful lessons. And so I think we're seeing a lot of real results as we're measuring what's coming out of it, looking at real efficacy. So we get really excited about that. There are some other things that we're doing that I think really bring the excitement of space, not just into the STEM education, but we're working with the Public Consulting Group now to write educational curricula for things like English language skills that actually bring the great stories of space into the classroom and let kids kind of see the excitement of space, in terms of storytelling and understanding how to communicate and understanding how to operate as teams. And so, we see that the possibility of bringing space into the classroom, is almost limitless.
Lift off and the clock has started. 0G and I feel fine.
American heroes.
Following Houston, you are go for staging. 1 dial for mankind.
Every one of their stories began here, in the classroom.
I want to learn about space because I want to know more to be the first person on Mars. Now that I know I can actually be like the first person on Mars, I really want to go.
That's why you'll also find the Aldrin Family Foundation in classrooms.
The fundamental strategy of the Aldrin Family Foundation is to start broadly and inspire literally hundreds of thousands of kids.
The AFF is on a mission to inspire the world through the Aldrin Space Institute and the Share Space Foundation. The Aldrin Space Institute for older students and Share Space for ones in K through 12. Share Space provides unique tools to advance STEAM education, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. It provides educators with Mars books, lesson plans, robots, and a giant Mars map.
It's larger than life, so it's not just a tiny little postcard, but it's 25 feet of Mars.
Well, my favorite part about the map is kind of like seeing all these rovers and seeing all the places that I never knew about on Mars.
In the past year, ShareSpace placed over 100 map kits across America and the globe.
Children, especially the campers, learn in a much more tactile way, so having something that they can crawl around on and touch and grab really helps them grasp the idea of things.
The purpose of the foundation is really to create the next generation of space leaders, entrepreneurs.
How long does it take to get to Mars?
To create those game changers of tomorrow, it will take the support of heroes like you.
So, we've been talking about the role of parents, and I think that's so critical right now when you think of, as we're taping this, we're all in our individual houses because of COVID-19. But there's no way to get around the fact that educators play such an important role. And I know as I watch my own daughter, there's things that I might say 5 times, and then she comes on and says, well, guess what? Mrs. So-and-so said such and such. I mean, it's amazing the role that educators have played. And I'd love to ask our panelists, what can you think of an educator that has really made a difference in your past, and why was their intervention so important to you?
Well, I remember all of my teachers that made a difference, and I know we like to have the sense that somehow back when I was going through school in the 50s and 60s that girls weren't encouraged in math and science, but in the rural area of Washington State that simply wasn't true. When I first articulated that I wanted to be an astronaut to my 5th grade teacher, he actually didn't laugh at me. Encouraged me to read some books. We didn't have a big library, but I did read those books. And then I went on to, as I graduated from 8th grade, and we actually had an 8th grade graduation ceremony for 22 kids, and had to go to a high school. He asked me what I was going to take as electives, and I didn't know what an elective was. We just, you went to school, you studied what the teacher gave you. And I said, well, I don't know. And he said, well, if you want to be an astronaut, you should take algebra. And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Trust me." And I did. And of course, that was the pathway: algebra, geometry, trigonometry, math analysis, and I took biology, chemistry, and physics. And it was my physics teacher my senior year, because applying to colleges was a new venture for us. But I finally was accepted to the University of Washington under the National Educator Act, or I wouldn't have been at college. I was working in the fields in the summer. And I took all this paperwork into Mr. Anderson, my physics teacher, and I said, "Well, what college should I select?" I thought I was going to college, and here it had all these colleges, like business and law. And he looked down the list and he said, "Bonnie, I think you should become an engineer." And we checked that block, and he changed my whole life. So in the fall of 1967, I entered engineering, and that was exactly the right place for me, and that's how I became an astronaut. Teachers made a difference.
Tracy, how about you?
I mean, like Bonnie, I came from, I was first generation college student. And my story getting into the, to NASA and in the astronaut corps involved a combination of teachers and my parents. I think everybody could say that, but in particular, when I was about to graduate, I was a junior in high school, and you're trying to decide if and where to go to college. I had absolutely no idea where to go and what to do, and I went to my parents and I said, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And so they asked me a series of questions that led me to think about what I enjoyed doing at that time in my grand 16 years of life. And they had me write a list, and they said, just keep adding to this list and make sure that it's your list, the things that you enjoy doing, because whatever you do later on in life, you want to enjoy what you're doing. And make sure that it's your list, not our list, not your sister's list, not your teacher's list, but your list. And you can add to it, you can take away from it, but always go back to that list, and whatever you do later in life, make sure that it has those things. So on my list, I had things like work with tools, because I did a lot of that with my dad. I liked science, though I didn't think I was very good at it. I liked languages. I was taking Spanish at the time. I knew sign language, and I really enjoyed the culture, learning about that, as well as learning about how to speak in their language, and so forth. And I also was an athlete, and so I thought, I don't know that I want to be an Olympian, but anything I do later on in life, I want it to be involving being strong and fit. And I had no idea after I looked at that list what I wanted to be. It still didn't jump out at me, but they said, put it away and just know that you can come back to it. Well, it happened to be the same year that the whole world was excited about something NASA was doing, and it was sending a teacher into space. It was 1986, and it was before the accident, but it was nonetheless a huge milestone in NASA's history. And it was for the first time in my life I ever thought about being an astronaut. I was like, a teacher's an astronaut? How is this? I thought they were all test pilots, and I didn't know any test pilots. But at that point in my life, I knew not only a few teachers, but teachers. I was with teachers more in my life than I was my own parents. And I had not just one teacher, but I had 6 teachers. And my teachers didn't just teach me algebra and science and language. They were my coaches. They were my counselors. They formed me. And so I was like, wow, if a teacher can be an astronaut, I got to figure out what this is all about. And so then I started to look more into what NASA was doing, what astronauts were doing. They were building a space station. Back then it was called Freedom, but they quickly transitioned to International Space Station. They were going to have to build the space station. And so I looked back at my list of all the things I had put on there, and I was like, I think I know what I want to be. I want to be an astronaut. And so for me, it was a combination of effort of teachers who had just done their job, not to mention the ones who took special attention to me for things I was doing, but my parents, who just so wisely guided me without forcing me in any one direction. And then for me, going on to college, I never thought possible. And I didn't, as I was going through college, think, I got to do this because I want to be an astronaut. I just kept doing the things that I enjoyed doing. And chemistry wasn't one of those things that was the pathway necessarily. People said, you want to go into the military? I was like, but I I don't. I want to go into science. And so every time someone would say, you got to do this, I just kept falling back on the advice of my parents. And in the end, it kind of worked out. So
I would say it more than kind of worked out, Tracy. I think that's awesome.
Nancy, you want to weigh in on that one?
For me, it was my high school math, biology, and chemistry teacher. And when I launched into space for the first time in my very limited family area, those 3 teachers sat by my parents because they had such a critical role in putting me where I was. I have said many times I was carried to the launch pad on their shoulders, and I really mean that. And so it were the teachers, and I think because someone like myself that was a first-generation college student, it was even more critical. I didn't understand the opportunities that were out there. I didn't understand even what was capable in my future. And it was the teachers in my life that pointed me towards those opportunities and created the fundamentals on which I built my entire career.
We talked a lot about teachers and how they've inspired you. Bonnie and Nancy, you both, I know, have a lot of experience on the other side of the rostrum, so to speak, teaching. Teaching is a very personal experience. Talk about times that you've been able to make a difference, on an individual level, where you've taken someone who may have a lot of talent, let's say, and has just somehow lost motivation. For me, those are the most rewarding moments. Talk a little bit about what it means to be a teacher.
Well, I never thought I would have that opportunity to be a teacher. My career has been industry and government and nonprofit, and I thought I was sort of past that point until a university came and recruited me and asked me to create a freshman class for mechanical engineers called Introduction to Engineering, and then I was recruited to A&M after that. And I'd have to think that one breakthrough moment came with my lead graduate student. In the beginning, you're sort of leading them, right? But you don't want to keep leading them. You want them to suddenly lead themselves. And it was that moment when he said, I got so interested in this topic last night that I lost track of time. And he was excited about what he found. And it was that moment I knew that he was on his own path. That his curiosity and his ability to learn was going to take him far down the road, and then that's proven true. He's a real star. So you hope you can always find more of those students, right?
Right. And I mean, it's right when they develop their own concepts. Students come to you first in graduate school and say, well, what do you want me to do? And I go, no, what do you want to do? Because if you're not passionate about it, you will not finish.
We spent some time talking today about how educators can make a difference and how we train things in classrooms. I'd like to pivot a little bit to talk about how does NASA train astronauts and how does NASA prepare that team that it takes to launch Artemis and to launch the Commercial Crew Program. Tracy, I know you've been an instructor astronaut where you've helped to train newest classes of astronauts. Can you talk a little bit about the role that you've played in that process?
Sure. I think that going into the astronaut corps, I never even thought of, I never fathomed being an instructor in such a thing. But when you start gaining a lot of experience, not just in space, because our missions are only a fraction of the time we spend being an astronaut, but all of the training and the development and just being a part of the support on the ground, you gain a lot of insight that when people come in new to the program, they're drinking from a fire hose and aren't going to necessarily pick up on some of these other nuances. It's kind of like, I gathered like a professor is when they've got new graduate students. It's just, you've got this learning curve, and it's nice to have somebody that has been there, done that to help keep you, kind of course correct you as you take in so much information. So being an instructor astronaut has been a real joy for me, not only from interacting with our new bright folks and how wide-eyed they are, but also to be a part of changing our training so that it more facilitates learning. And because we don't have a whole lot of time to train people, and our situations change a lot, so people have to be trained to a greater depth in a shorter period of time. It's been really rewarding to tap into the development of our training to see how we can help people learn more faster. And so that's been rewarding. But it really comes down to the people that we get to interact with, not just in the astronaut corps, but also the team of instructors that we have around us, and the phenomenal commitment in and amongst NASA and our partners to this endeavor. And it kind of lends itself to the whole team aspect as well. But I think being an astronaut instructor has certainly helped me to give back a little bit of what's been so generously given to me.
There are a lot of teachers out there watching this program, and a lot of them are trying to figure out, okay, space is cool, but what's your message to them of how to bring space into the classroom?
Oh, well, Tracy, you go first. You're doing it from the station.
That's pretty cool.
I think Mike listed a bunch of avenues to tap into what NASA's doing, but NASA we belong to the public. We belong to the country, and we're doing this so that we can teach not just ourselves, but the world of what's out there. And so there's no greater resource on the planet than to tap into NASA. And so I think from the tangible resources to the tuning into the latest launches and missions, manned and unmanned, and the future of where we're going is, I think the greatest resource that we have. And I think to tune in now, and especially the kids that could be listening to this are going to want to pay attention, because they are the ones who are going to be stepping foot on these planets that we are planning to go to. I mean, people like me and Bonnie, we've had a lot of experience in low Earth orbit, and we have helped, along with your dad, Andy, to lay the groundwork of what it is like and what it takes to work and do meaningful work in space. And it doesn't happen overnight, this learning, but kids need to be paying attention today to be prepared, because this is going to be like, some kids don't even know a life without cell phones. There's kids who don't know a life without space. And so I think for their benefit, because we are leaving this to them, they should be tuning in.
My primary message to teachers and parents is that instill upon your children that if they have the will and the persistence, they can achieve anything they want in life. As a very short individual who aspired to be a military aviator, who was a female, no one in my entire life told me I couldn't do that. And of course, when I started to say that, I literally wanted to fly from the time I could walk. So this was in the early 60s. My dad and my teachers never once told me, you can't do that. Little girls don't grow up to be military aviators. And so nobody squelched that desire and that dream in me. And I would say, no matter how far-reaching your children may dream, support them to the best of your ability.
And I think one of the other things we can do, and this is for teachers as well and parents, is give them a low-cost opportunity to almost touch space. When I went and looked at Sputnik, it was only 23 inches in diameter. People don't realize how small it was. And that you could tune your radio to hear it beep and actually watch it go across the sky. But we have many Americans that don't realize you can see the International Space Station. I still talk to schools, and I remember a conversation at a very large school in which the teacher said that they didn't talk about the space station because they didn't have a telescope to see it. And so they were quite surprised when I showed them the app, and that you could actually capture the imagination of students by being able to predict when this light was going to come over the horizon, the angle, the time, and how long it was going to transit the sky. And that my 93-year-old mother also looks up those sightings, and she calls all the neighbors. She even calls me, even though she's 2 time zones away, so I don't see it at the same time. But But those are exciting moments. And then you can say there are 6 people on that station, and you can go to the internet and see who they are, and they're people just like they are.
But, one of the incredible things about where we are today is, you can look out at a classroom and say any one of you is going to have an opportunity to fly in space, whether you're an astronaut or not. Any one of you will have an opportunity to work on spacecraft. There are kids in middle schools today building satellites that are flying in space. It's an incredible moment to actually bring the magic of space into classrooms.
Absolutely. Even on the shuttle, we had middle school students flying experiments, and that opportunity to connect with them was transformative, because I have some of them now at the university. So we know it works.
There you have it. Right.
We've just spent some time talking about Space Station. It's celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. And Bonnie, I love your stories about how you can see Space Station from wherever you are on the planet using that app. But there's some big milestones coming up just this month with Space Station and how we have access to it. Tracy, can you talk a little to us about the Commercial Crew Program and how we'll be launching Americans from Florida later this month?
Yeah, this is the final countdown to one of 2 Commercial Crew vehicles. We're still in the test phase, but at the end of this month, hopefully we will launch Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley on the SpaceX DM2 SpaceX Crew Dragon, and we're waiting for the sister flight, the Boeing flight CFT, to launch crew on board that, all to dock to the International Space Station. And this is so that we can open up space to our commercial partners, improve their capability, and support them in their quest to understand that environment and to thrive in it. And so this is a really exciting time for so many reasons, not the least of which is the fact that we're getting back to launching American-made vehicles from American soil. And though it has been a real blessing to have been a part of the Russian space program and the honor of launching on their vehicle and living on board the space station with our international partners. There's something about so that the American people that support this program can see the hard work that their support, their money goes to in terms of the support that they give to NASA, and to be able to launch from this country again will just make them feel a greater participation in this. And so this flight coming up, our Commercial Crew Program is going to spark a lot of interest and motivation just to renew something that we started a long time ago and to continue it. And then beyond that, we're hoping that will become our new way to get to the International Space Station, another very miraculous engineering feat that was built in the vacuum of space. And astronauts for decades have been a part of building that. And it's an exciting thing to be a part of, and that we can combine the Commercial Crew Program with something as steadfast as the International Space Station is, I think, a great way to transition to the next phase of space exploration.
I am so incredibly excited to see an American spacecraft launch from a U.S. launch site. It's been a long time. It's been obviously much longer than any of us. When I say any of us, I still assimilate myself with the big NASA family. Any of us might have thought when we retired the space shuttle. And so I am incredibly excited about this opportunity, and I think it's long past due.
Now, I think it's exciting that we're going to be launching back again off our soil. It's not only an inspiration to a generation that's actually not seen launches, but it's also an investment in a skill set and a workforce that we're going to need for the future. It's not easy to launch people into space or to build the rockets to do it. And we need a whole new generation of rocket engineers.
Talk about the importance of teamwork on the space station and how you can bring that into the classroom.
You know, the space station is all about being a team. It's interesting that you go from, let me just set the stage. When you're training for a shuttle flight, you are one member of a 7-person crew and you train all together. And that was my first flight experience. And then when I became an expedition crew member, I trained primarily by myself. I was the single U.S. crew member flying on a rocket with 2 other Russian cosmonauts. And I traveled all around the world, and my schedule was really just about me getting to places. And so it was quite different. And one would think just based off of that there wasn't much team in the space station. However, when you think about the space station from the crew size that, you're still a crew of 3, and then you get to the space station and you meet another crew of 3 and you become a crew of 6. And then if you had visiting vehicles coming, which we did at the time, you would have a shuttle of 6 to 7 other crew members. So you could be up to 12, 13 people on the space station. And you're having to assemble yourself as a team and teams within a team. And if that wasn't enough, then you've got a team on the ground. And the team on the ground is controlling the vehicle, and you're having to coordinate with them. And not only the people who operate the space station, but also all the scientists that are conducting experiments that you're a part of now. And it's not just in one location on the Earth, it's all around the globe. I mean, it's the planet. And so the team just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And as we move forward into space, it's going to take a larger team than that. And today we're commercial partners, we're international partners, we're industry partners, we're academic partners. It's all about the team. And there is no way a single entity can get to space and do what we can do today if it were just up to a single group. It takes a community, it takes a team. And so teamwork, I don't know that I had ever realized the importance of teamwork more than when I was on the space station. And I wouldn't have guessed that going into my training as I was traveling by myself. But it's made a huge impression on me, Andy.
So, Bonnie, one of the things that I've noticed, teaching at the university level is employers are really looking for students that have some experience doing teamwork in the classroom on projects. What are some of the things that we can do to bring more of that into the classroom?
Well, you're absolutely right. In fact, part of the ABET accreditation for engineering is by the senior year, we want them working on teams, design teams. And what I do is I draw on my own history. I went to work for Rockwell as an engineer building the space shuttle, and that was my first experience as teams. It all has to come together. And I came to NASA in mission control and was part of the Skylab reentry team, and then was selected as an astronaut. And as Tracy said, you have to be little teams and big teams, and you don't accomplish these big goals without being a team player. So now that I have graduate students, I remind them that this senior design course they had was not just a course to get a grade. And so I treat my lab as a team. I make them work together, they share data together, and try to incorporate those lessons so that when I turn them back out into academia or industry, and they're my students, they already know how to be part of a team. And they will be successful as a team member as they learn those skills.
The ultimate teamwork is on a space mission where literally your life depends on your teammates and their life depends on you. And I think when you come out of that environment, even if you go into a classroom where there's no threat to human existence really in a classroom, the more you can extend those same traits and impress upon students the necessity to learn how to work with students from other cultures and how to respect the language and the cultural differences, let alone the academic background differences, the better off we'll all be. Because it's going to take a large team on the ground and in space to explore beyond low Earth orbit.
And just going back to the original shuttle classes, the 78 class 80 on, one of the selection criteria was having a demonstrated ability to be a team member. They'd all ask us all what sports we played. And in fact, we had an astronaut softball team. Because we knew we were going to have larger crews, we had pilots coming in who had been single-seater pilots. We'd had mission specialists that had been in labs and never worked as part of a team. So not only did they look for team attributes, and sports was one of them, but also they created teams. Our astronaut classes were together for at least a year, participating in common events. And so I pass that on to my graduate students, because you're always asked, well, what are the requirements to be an astronaut? And it's not just the academics, it's the other soft skills, such as being a team player. And as Tracy brought up earlier, it's important to be more well-rounded. I also played sports and took languages, and I impress upon my students that communication, social skills, team playing, those are all part of the whole package in being a very successful, not just an astronaut, but scientist or engineer.
As we wrap up today, I just want to give a chance to Tracy, Nancy, and Bonnie. Just what's one thing you wish educators knew as we wrap up today?
Well, speaking for myself, the thing that made the difference for me, my favorite professor, my first year of college, asked me hard questions and then taught me how to think. And it was his job to help me answer it. And I think for the educators out there, if you realize that you are shaping a mind, and to share yours with them is one of the most powerful things that you can do for any moldable young mind out there.
Well, I think I'd first of all thank anyone who decided to be an educator to be an educator. My sister was a K-12 educator, and I'll just share a story about her. When I was with NASA, she found two ways of inspiring her students, especially the younger ones. One was through space pictures, and the others was through dinosaurs. But I supplied her with all the space pictures, and she found that very incentivizing and inspiring to her students. So space is still there, it's the future, and I think we need to find ways to connect our young people and help our teachers to do that.
I think the first thing they can do is to, try to ignite that passion. So if that passion is space, try to get them engaged as much as they can. The second fundamental thing, I think, is that role models play a critical aspect in a child's aspirations. And the more the child can look at somebody that looks like them and talks like them and maybe comes from their home state or their hometown or their home country, the more realistic their goals become. I call it the NASA geographical rule. If you were to ask a lot of kids in the Houston area, do you want to be an astronaut? They'd say yes, and that they think it's totally feasible. And the farther away you get sort of geographically from the hub of human spaceflight, the more abstract that goal becomes. So the more that they can make that goal appear to be realistic and inspire the children and inspire and ignite that passion. Because with will and passion, there's nothing they can't achieve.
So, Mike, I want to thank you. I want to thank all the educators that are out there making a difference every day and working so incredibly hard under difficult circumstances. My message to the educators out there is space is there. Space is there for you to use. I think we've learned that today. I also want to give a shout out to Public Consulting Group, who has been a tremendous supporter of everything we're trying to do here. And Mike, I think I'm going to toss it to you for the last comments here.
Thanks for joining us today. Thank you for joining from home, wherever you might be. Thank you to my fellow panelists. And let's close today by talking about the Artemis generation and knowing that we truly are going.
50 years ago, we pioneered a path to the moon. The trail we blazed cut through the fictions of science and showed us all what was possible.
It's very pretty out here.
Today, our calling to explore is even greater. To go farther, we must be able to sustain missions of greater distance and duration. We must use the resources we find at our destinations. We must overcome radiation, isolation, gravity, and extreme environments like never before. These are the challenges we face to push the bounds of humanity. We're going to the moon to stay by 2024, and this is how.
This all starts with the ability to get larger, heavier payloads off planet and beyond Earth's gravity.
For this, we designed an entirely new rocket.
The Space Launch System. SLS will be the most powerful rocket ever developed.
And with components in production
and more in testing,
this system is capable of being the catalyst for deep space missions.
We need a capsule
that can support humans from launch
through deep space and return safely back to Earth.
For this, we've built Orion.
This is NASA's next generation human space capsule.
Using data from lunar orbiters that continue to reveal the moon's hazards and resources,
we're currently developing an entirely new approach to landing and operating on the moon.
Using our commercial partners to deliver science instruments and robotics to the surface, we are paving the way for human missions in 2024.
Our charge is to go quickly and to stay, to press our collective efforts forward with a fervor that will see us return to the moon in a manner that is wholly different than 50 years ago.
We want lunar landers that are reusable,
that can land anywhere on the lunar surface. The simplest way to do so is to give them a platform in orbit around the moon from which to transition.
An orbiting platform to host deep space experiments and be a waypoint for human capsules. We call this lunar outpost Gateway.
The beauty of the Gateway is that it can be moved between orbits.
It will balance between the Earth and Moon's gravity,
in a position that is ideal for launching even deeper space missions.
In 2009, we learned that the moon contains millions of tons of water ice.
This ice can be extracted and purified for water. It can be separated in oxygen for breathing or hydrogen for rocket fuel.
The moon is quite uniquely suited
to prepare us and propel us to Mars and beyond.
This is what we are building.
This is what we're training for.
This we can replicate throughout the solar system.
This is the next chapter of human space exploration.
Humans are the most fragile element of this entire endeavor, and yet we go for humanity. We go to the moon and on to Mars to seek knowledge and understanding and to share it with all. We go knowing our efforts will create opportunities that cannot be foreseen. We go because we are destined to explore and see it with our own eyes. We turn towards the moon now, not as a conclusion, but as preparation, as a checkpoint toward all that lies beyond. Our greatest adventures remain ahead of us. We are going.
We're going.
We are going.
We are going. We're going.